I'm going to call to order this joint work session of the Monroe County Council and the Monroe County Board of Commissioners, all present for the Board of Commissioners, Penny Giffen, Lee Jones, and myself, Julie Thomas, and Mr. Deckard.
We've got from Monroe County Council online, I've got Councilor Hawk. Here in the room, I've got Councilor Wiltz, Councilor Crossley, Councilor Peter Iverson, and me.
Excellent. And just note for the record, because this is a work session, we will not be taking public comment, as is customary with our work sessions. Does anybody have anything they want to add to the agenda that was published for today? We have Sheriff Marte, Chief Deputy Parker, our jail commander. Do you have anything you want to add to the agenda today? Okay. All right. Item 3 is the Justice Complex location. This is the comparison between two sites. Really, we've left the older two on here, but it is a large 11 by 17 page that you have. We will be posting this on our website later. It's been updated a bit since you've seen this last, because we're no longer concerned about having to annex the property or connected properties with the city to the city as was presented to us before. We now know that we can actually run a sewer line to North Park if need be. We don't know if a package plant needs to be expanded or not at North Park, but either site would require that expansion because it would be the same stuff. So we have looked at the issues with slope and with the property, and Mr. Carnegie from DLZ is going to can talk a little bit more about the properties itself and how they fit with what we're looking to do. And we also have Ms. Hamidovich online from Vet Environmental, who can add more information comparing these two sites. So there are a lot of unknown costs involved with the Vernal Pike Woodyard. We also know that there are a lot more neighbors, residential neighbors, abutting this site versus North Park. We have a 4-lane roadway at North Park. We have a 2-lane road coming off of a roundabout following speed bumps through Vernal. And so clearly we spoke at the meeting at Detmer Park about our preference for North Park, and we made that clear at that point. But Mr. Carnegie, would you be willing to talk through the two site locations and what can and can't be done on those sites for us? He can.
Chairs.
We've got a billion chairs.
Can I ask a quick question before
Yes,
Mr. Carnegie starts? The spreadsheet that we have before us and the one that's being displayed on the screen, have these figures or facts been reviewed by county legal or the county auditor's office for accuracy, or has this been work that's been done solely in the commissioner's office?
This is information we've received, and this is the same information we've been using all along. So we didn't ask the auditor to review it, no.
Okay, nor county legal?
I've seen it multiple times.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've been a part.
Okay.
Wow.
Just for the record, county legal is speaking in the back saying that they have, quote, looked at it. I guess, I don't know. I don't want to.
Give us a moment, Mr. Carnegie.
I've seen variations of the spreadsheet all along, and some of the information I provided.
All right, Mr. Carnegie.
Good evening. Scott Carnegie with DLZ, project manager, also Monroe County resident. I don't frequently get to say that very often when designing the jail or justice complex. But first, I just want to maybe talk a little bit about the Vernal Pike site. So this is the same, this is the same graphic that we presented at the Vernal Pike community meeting at Ditmar Park a few weeks ago. And I'm going to get my cheat sheet. So there are 3 different parcels that we were asked to look at. Starting in the furthest to the west, that is a 14-acre site, currently zoned planned unit development. This one in the center is currently a 46-acre site, also zoned planned unit development. And then the site furthest to the east is a 53-acre parcel, and it's actually split into 2 different zones. One is estate residential 1 and light industrial to the south. So if you look at the legend over on the far right-hand side, you'll see several things that are keyed in that we analyzed. But first, let me just say that the footprint that you see listed there, it's the same footprint that we've been showing on all the different sites we've looked at. We did that intentionally, but that happens to be the Hamilton County Jail footprint. We chose that because I know some of you have toured and are familiar, and it's comparable in size. If you look at the legend, you will see the potential access to those sites. The one furthest to the west, the smaller 14-acre parcel, it really has no direct access to any thoroughfare. The one to the right, or in the middle, it does have access off of Vernal Pike. And the one furthest to the east, the 53-acre parcel, it also has access off of Vernal Pike and Woodyard Road. Water, there along Vernal Pike. There's also gas as well. There is no bus route to this site, so just to point that out. There is currently, off of information that's readily available online, there are 2 recorded karst sinkhole features. One happens to be kind of in the center of the site furthest to the east, and there's one recorded furthest to the west. Now, Vet Environmental, I've not seen their report, but they may have located more.
Hey, Scott, is that the red dot?
Dots.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes. So what you will probably find most interesting in looking at these, you'll see kind of a green color and a brown color. Those are 2 different slopes that are identified. Now keep in mind, this is without the benefit of a formal survey. So this is just information that's available online. But the area that's identified in kind of the brownish color, that's the area that's identified as a 25% slope. Now that's a recent change in the ordinance. The area that's identified in the green is a 15% slope. So of the 25% slope, so if you look at the brown area, there's actually approximately 36 acres that's actually buildable of that larger 53-acre parcel. If you consider the green, which is the 15%, it's actually less than that.
Scott, just real quick, the colors on the screen are a little different than what's on the board. So the red areas are not buildable, but the brown areas are.
So that's actually the image. It only shows the 25% slope. The green or the 15% is not reflected on the monitor.
Thank you.
So once we identified this information, you can also see that there's quite a bit of single-family homes, residential, that pretty well kind of isolate or do a donut around this potential site. Across the street, there's a lot of mobile homes, a lot of homes and families that live in there. Off of Woodyard, there's also a lot of single-family homes. And off of what I presume would potentially be the favorable site, the 53-acre parcel, there's actually single-family home residential right along Vernal Pike that would certainly be impacted. Over off of Curry Pike, being a local is kind of what I refer to as the industrial corridor, probably not as impacted quite so severely as the single-family homes. Once we had identified that information, we also, just like we did the other sites, we put together what we kind of referred to as the back of napkin sketches. And these are the same sketches that we presented during the Vernal Pike community meeting at Detmar Park a couple of weeks ago as well. So this is what we refer to as option A. And again, this is the easternmost part. This is the 53-acre parcel. This is Vernal Pike. This is Woodyard Road right through here. But the exercise that we were trying to do is to identify kind of, first of all, would it fit? And if so, how compact would the site be and how might that limit future expansion for the next generation? So you can see that it is a very compact site, and also realize that what you see here is the 25% slope. So if you were to actually use the 15% slope, I'm not even sure that what you see here would actually fit. So we went through that exercise. The other thing we also wanted to see is how potentially these buildings could be connected. Co-located, as far as the transporting of inmates, walking them back and forth, not having to put them on a bus. So you can see this dashed line right through here. That's what that implies there. There's some kind of connectivity that we would make between the two buildings, between the justice facility and the sheriff's office and jail.
That's no longer using that Hamilton County footprint, is it?
No, it is. This right here is the Hamilton County footprint.
The footprint for Hamilton County is just the jail on that.
This is just the sheriff's office and jail. This is the same Hamilton County footprint.
And
Correct.
then you've got other things in
Yeah,
there.
so-
Got it.
Yes. So,
Okay.
Good point, Kate. Let me just kind of point this out. So here where it's represented here is a P, that's parking.
Mhm.
So we're showing access both off of Vernal Pike and off of Woodyard. And as you might imagine, a lot of deliveries, and because of safety and security, it's pretty keen to get vehicular circulation around the building. So of the sheriff's office and jail here, then we also have staff parking back here, staff parking and the deliveries to the rear. The thing I want to point out, and I talked about it before, and that's the potential of future expansion. So this dashed line right here, that represents a potential future expansion of the general inmate housing pod. In other words, if you wanted to add additional beds, hopefully 20, 30, 40 years down the road. There is some space where that could be allocated. If you look over here at the courts, we are pushed right up against the property line. So it'd be pretty difficult to accommodate any future expansion of the justice facility. So we also then looked at some other options, and we just labeled this one as B. But again, you can see where we are taking advantage essentially of all three sites. And you can see we have access off of Woodyard Road over here. We have an outlot over here. There's some parking, there's some courts, there's additional parking. So when you see big kind of blips like this is staff, or this is a stormwater retention area where we have to have. And you can see then the vehicular circulation that goes on around to a jail facility located kind of more back here on the center lot. Now, keep in mind, when you see something like this, it's really not feasible as far as connectivity with the building, some kind of a tunnel. I'm not going to speak for the sheriff's office and jail, but I'll give you my opinion. If you're going to load inmates on a bus to move them 100 yards, you might as well move them 10 miles because that's the same effort more or less. But you can see then we have outlots located back here, but we're building essentially right behind the single family homes along Vernal Pike. We didn't really see this as being very feasible because the buildings are just too spread out. Now, the other thing I want to point out, and it was on the drawing that Phil Parker was holding up, there is a power line easement that runs right through here. It runs right along the west side of the larger 53-acre parcel. Essentially what that means, it's the same issue that we ran into on Thompson. Doesn't mean that you can't develop it, but as far as placing any kind of a permanent structure there, i.e. a building, you can't do it. Now, you can put a road or something like that across the easement, but you can't build a permanent structure. So then we looked at option C, And it's similar to option A, with the exception of we were really kind of trying to get the court facility more kind of upfront, focused off the intersection of Vernal Pike and Woodyard Road. You can see we have parking over here, and then the jail facility, and again, the vehicular circulation wraps around, and staff parking in the rear. Now, the one thing I will say, again, we have accommodated future expansion for the general inmate housing pod over here. You come over here to the courts, we're essentially, if there's any kind of a future expansion for a future generation, we're essentially taking some of the parking. And at that point, you may be talking about some kind of a vertical parking structure at some point down the road. So that was our assessment looking at the Vernal Pike sites. Any specific questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you for showing those. I think because of the camera configuration, for the 20 people online, it was hard to see those A, B, and C.
Sure.
Will digital copies be available at some point?
Yes. I believe if
Make those
Jeff
available.
Cockrell or Angie don't already have them, I can certainly forward them to post.
Can I add something here myself? I just want to add, I appreciate the clarity as you walk through all of that. And that's precisely when we asked for this meeting. And I appreciate very much the other elected officials jumping in on it, just so we can get clarity on these things narrated in an evening time meeting as best as possible. And this can just be out here in this box among all these officials.
Sure.
So this is extremely helpful. And from a Monroe County resident to boot is awesome.
And we have already had the full explanation of North Park and how things would be configured there. So I don't know that anybody needs that reviewed again. Does anybody?
I think it might be helpful, not just for us,
Yeah.
but for people watching, if
Yeah.
if it's not too much to ask.
Sure.
May I point out too, before you start on that, that to try to build on a 25% slope, you said this at the meeting on Vernal Pike, it costs a good bit more to try to build on anything beyond a 15% slope.
The other thing that I failed to mention, and sorry as I'm kind of thinking through this, has to do with the sanitary sewer issue.
Mhm.
So the Vernal Pike site is currently served, I believe it's an 8-inch sanitary sewer there along Vernal Pike. So we have ran some preliminary calculations based on an anticipated toilet count. It's not really that complicated. The Department of Corrections tell us how many fixtures we have to have per inmate, so we can calculate that pretty easily. And then we also calculated it on an anticipated occupant load for the justice facility, which again, the code dictates how many plumbing fixtures we have to have per person. So based on that, we anticipate a 12-inch sanitary sewer being required there along Vernal Pike. So as I think everybody, just as a refresher, I think everybody knows, when the county originally talked to the city about whether or not they would provide sanitary sewer service there to Vernal Pike, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the city said only if they were voluntarily annexed would they provide sanitary sewer service to that site. At the time or soon thereafter, the Midwest Regional Sewer District, I think, came forth and said, hey, we can provide sanitary sewer service to the Vernal Pike site. So it's essentially all the way back over to the station over on the North Park site. It's the same group, and that's where it would actually end up being. So just full disclosure and kind of bring it all to full circle.
But that would need a lift station and would long-term cost more, right?
Probably, and maybe more than one lift station,
Yeah.
multiple.
Yeah. Much more maintenance.
And I would add, if I could, for folks watching at home who are trying to figure out what's going on with this, and you see about 2 headlines every so often, and you're trying to figure it out. Literally, Mr. Carnegie is talking about Vernal Pike, an option that has been brought up, and the realities at Vernal Pike. And next, we'll go into North Park as these sites are discussed. This isn't anybody saying, or anybody saying, this is where this is going, how this is going to be. This is the options at that site and the realities of that site. We have also heard from the public on both sides so far, among other sites.
May I also point out, because we don't have the some of the environmental and geological studies, we also don't know if the vernal pike would meet the needs from that standpoint.
Scott, one thing from the sheriff's office that's of grave importance to us. Obviously, we've got an estimated cost of delay, which that's a dollars thing. But one of our concern is the time if we move to the vernal site and start looking at that as a viable site. I guess I just put it in as succinct terms as I can. What's the delay factor here as to where we are positioned currently with North Park and where we are positioned with vernal in terms of when you can start actually moving on the site?
So I'm kind of looking over at Jeff Cockrell.
Yeah.
However, I believe that North Park, we have completed geotech, so that's the soil borings to determine the soil condition and the depth. I'm going to say depth of bedrock because we're in Monroe County. We know there's going to be bedrock. But we now know the depth and the soil composition of North Park. And that environmental, I believe, has completed both phase 1 and phase 2. And I believe out at Vernal Pike, I believe a phase 1 is currently underway. I'm not sure about the status of a geotech.
Jeff's going to answer that.
I think we've gotten the geotech going. We don't have that back. The phase 1 has been returned for Vernal Pike as well. And I expect and Sarah with Vet Environmental is on here, so she can correct me wherever I'm wrong. But we did authorize the waterway and jurisdictional waters report for that site, and I would expect that back in a couple weeks. So we are moving on that. I really wanted to make one slight correction to something Scott said earlier. I had talked to a staff, the engineer for South Central Regional Sewer District, who said they could, and we were just looking at the feasibility of whether that plant could provide it. I've not talked to anybody on the board of South Central Regional Sewer District, I just want to be clear that board has not said yes, but we've talked with their staff to see if it was feasible.
And we would like to hear from Ms. Hamidovich from Vet, but I think if you talk through North Park briefly next, just to bring everybody up to speed, then we could hear from her and
Sure.
have questions. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So looking at North Park site, so we've previously put together, again, what we call back of napkin sketches. We came up with an ABC type scenario. And I believe in conversation with the current property owner, Mr. Steve Kreider, in presenting these options, what layout he might prefer, because I think there was some property there that he was interested in potentially keeping for some outlots as an investment and to bring some development into the area. So essentially the ABC were just different configurations. So you can see in option A, there were outlots here along the 46 bypass. Option B, there was actually outlots here more along this stem road. And then option C, where Monroe County would take the property there along the 46 bypass, and the outlots would be to the east or to the rear. And after conversation with the current property owner, Steve Kreider, I think he preferred option A. So that was the kind of the scheme that we've kind of been looking at as a possibility. But the sewer package plant that we've been referring to is right over here. That's the one that ultimately, with Jeff's correction or clarification, we might be able to connect to on the Vernal Pike site. But this in total area that you see right here, this is 42.6 acres. Now keep in mind, again, just like the Vernal Pike, this is without the benefit of a formal survey. So this is information that's readily available online that we've calculated this. But again, we've used the Hamilton County footprint for comparative purposes and the court facility. And you can see the parking that we have located here. We have some stormwater detention. And again, the loop drive going around to the service delivery area back here on the jail. And again, you can see a similar dashed line showing some kind of connectivity between the two facilities. Now, the other thing I want to point out is this area back here, there's been just some very off the cuff, we're all kind of dreaming right now, as this area being kind of a parking area for now, for potential access to the property that the county already owns as far as a park back here. Now, what I will say about North Park is when you compare the two, this one to Vernal Pike, the site is not nearly as compact as Vernal Pike is. Now, this provides a lot more opportunity for future growth and expansion. And again, as a Monroe County resident, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to speak my piece here at this forum. I personally believe that it's short-sighted to not think about what Monroe County might need 20, 30, 40 years from now. So I spoke my piece. So anyway, that's essentially the layout and configuration. There's water, sewer, electric, all of that right here on this site. And the other thing I will point out, and again, this image, we had available at the Vernal Pike community meeting at Ditmer Park. This simply compares and contrasts the two different sites. So over here in the red, that is the Vernal Pike. The yellow over here, this is North Park. We simply drew a 1 mile radius just to get some sense as to the impact to the single family homes within the 1 mile radius. I think if you look at the yellow, now when I was asked to put this together, I kind of jokingly said, you're not expecting me to go through and actually count all the homes. The answer was no. But you can see here in the yellow, the 1 mile radius, just by looking at the amount of green area around here, it certainly appears that there's far less single family home or residential impacted by North Park, as opposed to, you can see here in the 1 mile radius of the Vernal Pike site. So I just wanted to point that out since this was previously presented at the meeting.
So does anyone have questions, either from sheriff or staff or anybody from the council on the two sites comparing them? Ms. Crossley?
Oh, sorry. Hey. The question that I had, because I noticed the parking there, would parking at North Park, is that just one level or is that vertical parking as well?
Yeah, so currently what I've shown here on either of the sites is what we call surface parking. Mm-hmm. No vertical parking. My only comment was at the Vernal Pike site, because it is so compact, at some point when the county, 20, 30 years from now, if they deem a future expansion, courts, whatever, a necessity, and we have to take surface parking area to accommodate that, we may have to take another surface area and go vertical to a parking structure.
Okay.
Whereas the North Park site, because it's not nearly as compact, it would accommodate most likely any future expansion in our lifetime without having to go to vertical construction.
Just in comparing and contrasting both sites now, and your expertise, what you're basically, I don't want to put words in your mouth, basically what is being said is really like Vernal is almost like a here for the next 20 years, but not long term, because we're literally on top of a lot of different things and we can't really expand, essentially.
You put words in my mouth very, very well.
Okay.
Very, very concisely.
Okay, thank you.
Did you have something, Kate?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, on the two back of the napkins that you have there. So that's the one for North Park.
Correct.
And when you say that one has more room for expansion, are you including, where are you seeing that room? Is it into that left-hand area, or is that the outlots? I guess I wasn't.
Yeah, so
clear.
Potentially over here in this area, that would accommodate.
So where that parking for the other thing might be.
Correct.
Okay.
And again, just like the Vernal Pike site, this dashed box right here is to reflect a potential housing block for generally made
Got
housing.
it.
Now, when I say that, as a standard policy for DLC, what we refer to as the core services of a jail. Because keep in mind, a jail is a 24/7 securely operated facility, never shuts down. There are certain components, the core services within a jail facility that we design as a matter of DLC policy to accommodate a future expansion. Because we don't want to come in and disrupt the jail operation 20, 30, 40 years from now to accommodate a future expansion. And those include the intake booking area, the medical, the kitchen, and the laundry. Those are the areas that are really the heartbeat of a jail that you don't want to take down. So we oversize those intentionally to accommodate a future expansion. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
One of the things that we think about as well with the location is in case we have to evacuate the jail, it sounds like North Park will give us a space for that just in case it does. What keeps going in my mind is when we had the actual gas leak and we had no place to go. And we were very, very fortunate that the fire marshal didn't tell us to shut it down. So that's crucial as well, that we have the space for expansion. And I know sometimes people look at that the wrong way. However, we need to have the space to evacuate in the case of the emergency that we just can't predict. So I think for that reason, we need the space for that as well.
Any other questions on the comparison, Mr. Rogers?
I have just 3 quick questions. The first is the same as before. If those could be made available publicly, there's people online just because the cameras are wonky in here.
Sure.
Thank you. Second question is, I know you've shared this before, but it's, I've got gray in the beard, so I've forgotten. This square footage estimate for the Hamilton County footprint, what is that square footage?
I actually have it in my bag back there, but it's roughly 140, 150,000 gross square feet, I believe.
And then based on, what is the estimated square footage of the justice facility? Or the, not the jail section, but the justice complex?
So good segue. So what we have currently been programming, and I've been working with the transition team, I think our next meeting will be the 10th meeting in developing the program, and in conjunction with Weddle Brother, Garmong Smoot, Chris Sealy in particular. What we have been, our goal for the target gross square footage of the sheriff's office and jail is 150,000 gross square feet. That's what we believe was a good budget number to accommodate the needs of the Monroe County Sheriff's Office. So then deducting that from the overall, what we have estimated as a budget, total project budget, that would accommodate approximately 965 gross square feet for the justice facility. That's what we believe the budget would support.
And those documents that you're looking at right now, we've talked about them numerous times, and those haven't changed.
So I'm looking back here, Chris. I kind of prepped him to dive in here, but this particular spreadsheet, let me just unfold it real quick. So you all previously received a version that was actually this. And recently, I believe Weddle Garmong had updated this, which the numbers that I just cited are based off of the updated gross square footage and budget figures.
So just to clarify what Scott's saying.
You'll need to
Need to
step
be on
into
a
the
mic.
mic, sorry.
Sorry, so just to clarify what Scott is saying, one thing that I think we've been pretty consistent about, thank you, Scott, is that time is money, and there's an inflation factor that's going into this. Well, as we're watching the schedule go and schedule tick, and knowing that we're still talking about site selection, we haven't started any design, or they haven't started any design. So in an effort to be fully transparent with everybody, we said, well, we better go ahead and add the first year of inflation onto this. So pushing this into 2026 construction, we went ahead and increased those square footage costs by 5%, which is what he's referring to. That takes the new square foot cost for the jail to over $708 a square foot. It's an estimate, but that's what we're anticipating it's going to go to. Justice facility, we're looking at $604 a square foot, which is different than what we originally presented. But again, we know that nothing is getting less expensive. Everything is getting more expensive. Labor is going up, materials are going up. So this is that first tick of the needle. We anticipate cost going up if we push it into another year. So again, inflation is real. Things are going to cost more money.
Thank you.
Well, this is actually a later item on our agenda, so it's kind of, yeah, we're kind of doing two things at once, which is fine, but if we could focus first on the comparison between the two and then address, but thank you. I mean, no, this is really helpful. If we could focus on the comparisons, which is the point here, and then we can hear from Ms. Amitovich from VET, and then we can move on, that would be great.
My third and final question. Based on what you've seen and what you've been going through, we've talked about expansion 20, 30 years down the road, but right now, is one site more shovel ready than the other?
Well, based on who I think is going to speak next, I think is going to influence my answer, but what I believe Vet Environmental is going to say, my answer would be, I believe North Park is more shovel ready. We can keep moving on that faster. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think we should hear from.
I do too, but it's important to hear your opinion.
All right, Ms. Amitovich, if you could join us, we would appreciate it. If you could tell us your take on the two different sites that are under consideration, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I think I'm going to go kind of line by line and discuss each site, kind of pros and cons on all the different environmental issues that we've looked at to date. I think that will be the most clear way to go about this. So I think the sheriff had just mentioned timeline, and I think that to kind of comment from my perspective on his point, this week we finally received the final response that we were waiting on from the IDNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which completes all of our investigation and basically all investigative activities that we deem necessary for the North Park site. So the North Park site, from my perspective, is shovel ready now. The one caveat for that is that depending on how the design of the property looks, we then need to kind of just have a sit down and make sure that any environmental features that we've identified are not affected by the development, or that we are properly permitted for impacts to those features during the development. But from my perspective, North Park is shovel ready now. Vernal Pike has a lot of work left to do from an environmental standpoint. So first, water resources. So we're talking streams and wetlands. The North Park site has two ephemeral streams that are well established. They're in large V-shaped channels that run through the site. There are no wetlands that we identified on the North Park site. The Vernal Pike site, we finished our field work yesterday. We have not delivered this report yet, but preliminarily we've identified 14 ephemeral streams, one perennial stream, which is Stout Creek. Stout Creek also runs adjacent to the North Park site, but it does not actually proceed onto the North Park site. And we identified one wetland area on the Vernal Pike site. And I think the most significant discussion about water resources as it pertains to development projects is the timeline. So permitting for these features, for impacts to these features on the Vernal Pike site, would go through both the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and the Army Corps of Engineers. And just for timeline reference, we are waiting on a permit. Well, not even the full-on permit. We're waiting on consultation with the Corps of Engineers that we submitted last year when it was snowing. So the Corps of Engineers is slow. I've seen it take 14 months for these permits to get approved. And that was for a City of Bloomington project. So there's not a lot of strong arming or negotiating or coercing, or I don't know what the right word is, just because it's for a municipality, the Corps of Engineers is not going to move more quickly on the permit, in my experience. So I think that because there are 14 streams on the Vernal Pike site, if any of those need to be impacted, we're going to be waiting for a significant amount of time to get permits to do so. And, you know, for both sites, the important thing is if there is an ability to avoid impacting any of these water resources, it is absolutely within the county's best interest to do so, just because of the timeline. Does anyone have any questions about water resources before I move on?
Oh, please proceed.
Okay. So at North Park and Vernal, we have completed our phase 1 environmental site assessments at both. Findings at both were similar. North Park, we completed our phase 2 investigation. We found very, very minimal impacts, nothing that would prohibit development in any way. From an environmental perspective there. Vernal Pike, we have not been given the green light to do a phase 2 investigation there, so we can't really speak to that. But what I will say is the concern on both of these properties was the presence of Stout Creek, as Stout Creek was historically a discharge location for wastewater coming from Westinghouse. And so, you know, we didn't find anything problematic at North Park, but the Vernal Pike site is closer to Westinghouse than North Park is. So we cannot rule out that there would be contamination in the floodplain surrounding Stout Creek on the Vernal Pike site. But again, we have not looked for that yet. Moving on to karst. The karst assessment at North Park is complete. There are 3 sinkholes on the site. They are relatively small in area. We've provided an exhibit that shows both the areas of the sinkholes and the kind of proposed sinkhole conservation area. They're located within existing wood lines on the property in areas that may or may not be planned for development. Again, if those features can be avoided, it would certainly streamline the process. A karst assessment has not been done at Vernal Pike yet. We did, however, observe a fair amount of suspected sinkhole features when we were in the field over the last couple days. So I anticipate that if a karst assessment is done, additional karst features will be identified than what are currently mapped. So moving on to archaeological. There were archaeological features identified at the North Park site. Most of them had been they had been torn down, they're gone. But one thing that we did have to do is we had to go through a process with the state to have the features that were identified as historically located on the site being added to the state register of the different archaeological features. That process took probably 45 to 60 days to get that updated. So that, again, that was a timeline thing that took some time working with the regulators. We have not done archaeological on the Vernal Pike site, but based on what I saw when I was walking through all the forested areas out there, I do believe that that site was historically used as homesteads, or there's certainly evidence in the woods and in the streams of archaeological features being present. And I think that this is a good place to mention that the amount of forested area on the Vernal Pike site is substantially greater than the amount of forested area that's present on the North Park site. And because of that, I think the archaeological assessment will be considerably more involved, considerably more expensive, considerably more time consuming. And I imagine they will find features that will likely need to be added to a register or be dealt with in one way or another. Moving on to the final thing that we looked at, which was the endangered species. There were a handful of endangered species on the North Park site, or that are present in the area of the North Park site. The 2 primary of which are the Indiana bat and the northern long-eared bat. We received response back yesterday from Fish and Wildlife and the DNR, saying that as long as we follow their list of recommendations, they don't have any qualms with the North Park development going forward. The one stipulation that they put in there is depending on how long the development takes, if there are additional species listed in that amount of time, we may have to go back to them for additional approvals. But generally speaking, they don't have any issue with the North Park site. One of the things that we did as we submitted that application is we ensured that we included 100% of the vegetation on the North Park site, because we don't have a clear plan of what the development will look like. And so we said, if they decide to cut every single tree on the property, are they going to get in trouble for doing so? And Fish and Wildlife and the IDNR said no, as long as you follow their set of stipulations, which they presented to us. Again, at Vernal Pike, there is a considerable amount of forest. There's some apparently old growth timber there. I think the likelihood of having endangered species on that site that are using that forested area is quite a bit higher. Likely will have a more significant involvement with DNR and the Fish and Wildlife Service. So I think just the presence of the water resources and the forested area on the Vernal Pike site will certainly add a considerable amount of cost and time, just kind of sorting out the environmental impacts on the sites. And that's all that I have,
Right.
unless there's questions.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you for so much information. It's really appreciated. And my understanding is that the phase 2 environmental has not yet been done at Vernal. I think I heard you say that. Is that correct?
Correct. We have not done one.
How long would it take to do phase 2 at Vernal Pike?
So generally speaking, the tricky part with the phase 2 is we have to wait for the laboratory analytical to come back. The type of investigation that we would recommend at that site, I would say we could expedite a 3 to 4 week turnaround time on a phase 2.
Does that include karst, archaeological, and endangered species reports?
It does not. No.
Okay,
so
that would be
the
added
phase
time.
2 would just be us going out, collecting samples, getting the laboratory analytical back, interpreting those, and then presenting a report. The part about the karst could absolutely be done in that same timeline. The endangered species and archaeological, where it becomes challenging, just like with the water resources, is that we have to do our work and then we have to submit our work to a regulatory agency, wait for their review, receive their feedback, potentially comment back, potentially get a permit. So those turns of the wheels with the regulators are really what slows that process down considerably.
Sure. And my final question is, in terms of the North Park property, you had mentioned permits might be needed. What timeline would you expect for any type of that to take place?
Sure. So that's a tricky question to answer. I think that in my experience, and I am not digging on the Corps of Engineers by any means, they've recently had some pretty pivotal turns in the way that they're regulating water resources. So they're right now trying to figure that out. But I mean, again, I have waited a year to get a permit for impacts to water resources on a City of Bloomington job. And so, I mean, we have all of our work done that could be submitted to them, but it's likely that we wait a year for a permit if we have to impact water resources. If we can avoid the water resources, we may not need a permit at all.
But I think, because we had this question come up when we first got the notice on North Park that there was an archaeological find, which is an old homestead. And the question arose about, well, is this going to delay us at all? And the answer is?
So to that environmental's report or comment, I think the key there is to strategically avoid impacting those areas, which, given the nature of the North Park site, there's a lot more opportunity to avoid obstructions or obstacles like that than there would be at Vernal Pike.
So
absolutely, I agree with that. And the other thing that I'd like to chime in about that is the archaeological features that are there. We do not have to avoid them. They just needed to be recorded. And so we've already done our due diligence there. The county has done everything they need to do to be in compliance on those features. The other thing that's really nice about North Park is the locations of the sinkholes and the locations of the ephemeral streams still provide a large contiguous square-shaped area for development. The problem with the Vernal Pike site is you saw DLZ's map with the red shaded areas. Well, then you're gonna go in and overlay our map that has these water resources and the wetlands and potential sinkholes, and you're gonna overlay all of our features on top of theirs. And that developable area becomes smaller and smaller as we put each additional layer of impacts that we want to avoid on top of that.
Mr. Decker?
And Sarah, if I'm understanding this correctly, essentially what you're saying is on Vernal, because of a multitude of things, including the forestry and not knowing what's there, we're going to dig harder, longer to figure out what we're dealing with, and then likely have less area to play around in, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. The investigations are going to be harder and more complicated. They're going to cost more. They're going to take longer. The outcomes of those investigations, in my professional experience, are not going to be something that is necessarily beneficial. And then we're going to wait a very, very long time to get some of these permits.
And one thing that you said, you were talking about the Corps of Engineers, and with all due respect to them, I have a little experience with them. They're not under the pressure of moving quick in any shape or form, and no call to a member of Congress or senator will expedite that too quickly. It just is what it is.
It will not.
We are.
That's right. And that is my experience.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Yes, please.
I just want to confirm both with Sarah and with Scott that the North Park back of napkin sketch that's the most ideal that you shared. Sorry about the pen in your face. Does not encroach upon the known waterways that Sarah referred to on that same property to any extent that would require permitting, because I'm not sure what the buffer is. I know it didn't overlay the ephemeral stream. I get that part, but I just don't know what the buffers are. And I just want to clarify what you have sketched out does not require us going through the core permitting as it stands now.
So, sorry, Sarah, I'll go first if you want to jump in.
Okay.
But
Sure.
I don't recall the exact timing of the back of napkin sketches versus Vet Environmental coming in and, doing their investigation. But I believe the back of napkin sketches occurred before Vet Environmental came in and did their assessment. However, please keep in mind that these back of napkin sketches are exactly that. I will almost guarantee you a steak dinner that what we have presented here on the back of napkin sketches, it'll look similar, but it will be rearranged and building footprints reconfigured. All that to say is that now that we have the Vet Environmental analysis and that information, we will absolutely do our due diligence to make sure that we stay out of those areas at all possible.
Sure, and we can certainly get together and overlay our features, and maybe his plan does avoid those areas. Like I said, the nice thing about North Park is that it is a big, wide open square. Where Vernal Pike, it's kind of this, meandering, funny-looking feature with lots of little arms and legs once you put all the water resources and slopes and all the things like that on there. So we can certainly provide our data so that he can overlay and see how his plan does impact water resources, sinkholes, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else have questions comparing the two properties? Okay, so we've already talked a bit about square footage, and thank you again, Ms. Hamidovich, for being here. Appreciate you waiting. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So we've had some discussion about square footage. Is there anything else on that topic that anyone has questions about or wishes to raise it? I mean, we have a budget, and that's what we have. So.
Yeah, we do definitely. We have a budget and a lot of constraints, and one of the things that, if I've read our process correctly, is we have said that we want the jail facility and we want co-location with that, and figuring out the details of that under the constraints of a budget, because ultimately, if it can't fit in that, it cannot fit in that. And co-location does have that cost, and it's a value we chose in 1986, maybe even before that when we went over to the Justice Building. It's a value that we're choosing with this, but it does have a cost, and so that budget becomes our ultimate constraint. That's been pretty clear.
Anybody wish to offer their opinion or insight into which site is preferred? Yes, Mr. Decker.
I can offer some. I received a message from Counselor McKim. He couldn't be here, and I'll just offer his remarks because he's not here to ask questions or offer good input as he does. But he did indicate to me he believes that North Park has become the viable option for some of the reasons that have been specified, including the need to move forward in this project. I think we've heard a lot of arguments about both sides, the ability to move forward, and I think his sentiment is, while he could not be here, that North Park seems to be an answer for that. And I'll leave it there and let others talk, and then I'll come back to me.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, first and foremost, I appreciate having this particular forum so that we can air out grievances or whatever, like a lot of different things that we all are feeling. And I know just personally, as one fiscal body member, I really, really hoped potentially that Vernal could be a thing where we could look at. And listening to a lot of the presentations and a lot of different concerns, and now endangered species also is into the mix as well. It's a lot to take in. I think I was like making faces during the meeting, not just because of who was saying what. It was just, your heart is just sinking as you're thinking about a lot of different things. And as we continue to all say, I think we have to figure out how we can move expeditiously, because we cannot wait. And I really, really hoped that Vernal could be a thing. I mean, North Park obviously seems to be the part where we could do. I guess my whole thing was, you don't want to do what the hospital has done, and we are doomed on day one when we open up on day one. And we also don't want to be doomed on day one because we also know that ACLU could also come for us on day one too. So we have a lot of different factors. This very much feels like a love it or list it version of, what we want in terms of all the things that we decide that we want. So, I mean, it's a lot to think about. We do have a budget. Indeed, I think we have to stick to that budget. And, council has done what we need to do in terms of passing the correctional text, whether you agree with it or not. We had to do what we had to do there. We have the ED lit. And now we're at a point right now where we have to move forward. The other part to Vernal is we hear that there's a lot of delay, and, hearing that it could take potentially, or, other projects took like 14 months. I don't think we can wait. So, this was very eye-opening, and now we got to do. We can't make everybody happy. So I'm sure people are probably grimacing in this room or listening online, or will listen online, and that is okay, because I can take it. But we have to do what we have to do, and we have to do it in a manner that is great for this county. So, thanks.
I was surprised at some of these delays that we heard about from Ms. Haminovich tonight. I had no idea that getting approval from the Army Corps of Engineer, which would be after all these other studies are done. So we're not looking at just 14 months. We're looking at much longer. And one of the things that we've heard from the sheriff and his staff, and I've heard from my colleagues, is that there's a human cost to delay. Definitely a human cost, both to the people who are incarcerated and to the sheriff's staff. And I think that they deserve our support by moving forward as expeditiously as we can at this point. We know we have a reasonable site with North Park. I believe personally that the access to North Park in terms of the roadways is superior. And so I would encourage us all to settle on North Park at this point, just so that we can get something done for the residents of our community. Commissioner Jones, did you want to?
Yeah, from when we first started discussing this topic, one of my main concerns was to not plop a jail down in the midst of a residential area. This is and it's not that I think that living next to a jail is such an intolerable thing. I think lots of people move in next to jails and aren't worried about it at all. But to already be living somewhere and have a jail suddenly thrust on you feels really very different. And the first location we looked at was pretty ideal where this was concerned, but the city didn't agree with us. So to me, this location is by far the best of any of them that we've looked at. It does not have to have a big impact on much of any residential area. Certainly many, many few more, as Scott showed us, than several of the other locations we've looked at. And I think this is something that we kind of owe to our community, to go with the location that in many ways is the best location. I agree with Commissioner Githens that Vernal Pike is not a good place to be locating a sheriff's station. People leave a sheriff's station in a big hurry, making a lot of noise. There are a whole lot of residents who live right there. And I don't think this is a good thing to do for them. So anyhow, I really do believe that we have come up with not the ideal location. We were never going to find that, but the best location that we could expect.
Thank you. Did anybody from Sheriff Marte or anybody else wish to comment on?
I'll speak last. I think you wanted to say something, Trent.
I'd actually defer to the sheriff. I'd love to hear from you.
Well, so far, what I've heard so far, I agree with as far as North Park. I could honestly say that each person here did their very best to do everything to hear the citizens and try to provide them with the very best that you can. I truly believe that. I also want to say that we come from a unique perspective, though, is that since we go to this particular facility every single day and work there, and we have the responsibility of the people that are there and also the staff, I do know the urgency, and I do know that I've tried to push as much as I can, is because I understand what we're facing. God forbid what brings tomorrow, and we're not ready yet. That's the greatest fear. Now, as far as location, we were thinking in the sense of we do not want to repeat what was done before in the past, that if you open this jail and we're not ready from day one and we repeat the same mistakes, then all this time, everything that you guys have done, why? So we have to think that we don't have all the answers until the people move in there, because we won't see that jail. So what I'm saying, it's not for us. It's for the next group of people that are going to be working there. So we want to leave them in a situation where they could do the very best that they can, not having all the answers. And again, I'm fully aware we can't please everybody. We would like to. I would like to. We just can't. We have a responsibility to move forward at this point, because I assure you, any given moment in the place where we're now, something very, very negative could happen. And we're doing our very best that we can, but we're only human as well. So I accommodate, I appreciate the hard work that everyone has done here, because for us, time is of the essence. So North Park, I heard some of the concerns of North Park. I think people at times, not knowing the unknown, fear the unknown. But where we're at right now, a lot of people drive by that place and realize it's a jail. So this location is going to be more modern. The building's going to be more modern. You won't even probably realize it's an actual correctional facility if we do it right, and I think we will. So with that being said, again, I want to end with thank you all for really getting to this point, because we are very concerned and we're trying to avoid something really negative happening in that place, because then it's really shame on us at that point. So.
Anyone else wish to offer comments?
I come back to what I've said consistently I believe recently, at least consistently, we got to move, and a movement, which is what, when council approached the funding option, we have to move. And I think as we start to look at options here, I think we see an option that's got the ability to move. And I will say this, a fear I've had for a long time with this, that if we are not moving deliberately and moving accurately with the present folks that we have, someone else will move for us and decide those things. And that could include location. Now, I'm not throwing that out to be just a fear out there, but I'd rather Monroe County residents have that input than others or an outside force. I also will say this, I hear a lot about location and where it goes and where it doesn't go. And I am always sympathetic to what people want near them and what they want not near them. In this community, we do spend a lot of time, not just on jail, but literally on everything, talking about what people do and do not want and who they do and do not want. And I don't know, as the 9th generation townie, I'm starting to wondering how anyone got in here. As a child, I grew up a child of a court reporter in that facility, one floor down from that jail, watching my mom crank out transcripts to pay for our livelihood. And I could hear prisoners above me. I was around that all the time, eating my snacks, doing my homework, reading my comic books. And she was there late at nights and all those things. And I just believe in a secure facility and in a secure location, we, among our neighbors, our friends, and under the protection of the sheriff's department, we have nothing to fear but the fears that we create sometimes ourselves. And so I think there's a way to do this and do it right and do it fine, and we'll be okay. And to me, the North Park seems like it is the evident in that choice.
Anybody else want to go ahead, please?
Thanks. Coming in here, I literally had no idea what I was gonna if I was gonna say anything. But I do think that the responsible thing to do is to let folks know what you're thinking when you're asked, hey, what are y'all thinking? So here I am. And it seems as though what we have left are just two options. Those are not my first options. I don't think they're everybody's first options, but of the two options that seem to be the only realistic ones that have survived the process, one is clearly more environmentally responsible. I think that was made clear with the presentations tonight, and that's very important to me. I do have some concerns about transit and transportation. I'm hopeful that we can address those because we are decentralizing some core services as we move away from the city with the Justice campus, and that's going to have an impact on our community. And I hope that perhaps we can leverage this for improved public transit across the county in some way. I'm not as eloquent as Councilor Deckard there, so I won't go on for too long, but I think in the interest of moving forward and creating something that will better protect those that work in the jail, those that spend time in the jail, we need to go ahead and select North Park.
Yeah, let me add in my 2 cents here. On Tuesday, October the 8th, I think the council made it really clear to this community that we hear the sheriff when he says we have to be expeditious. We hear that the community is saying we've got to move. And with that increased tax rate that the council almost unanimously adopted, we now have the resources to move forward. I will say that as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about it from the lens of what we learned talking to the community through the JFAC process, the Justice Fiscal Advisory Commission. And what we heard from the community was they wanted a place where we can expand community services to avoid involvement with the justice system, where we can enhance reentry programs to support individuals transitioning back into society, where we can strengthen community corrections initiatives, prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our justice system, and improve access to treatment with those struggling from both mental health and substance use disorder issues. When I think about a location that would provide space to do any and all of those things, I think it's clear that one location has the space for us to be able to expand into those areas into the future. And I think the other aspect that I think that is really important, other than timing and what we can do for the community, is that with that additional space, it makes co-location even more possible as we move into the future. Thank you.
I have been a proponent of North Park for a very long time, and I'm just really happy that we're coming back around. And I think my concern has been space all along and ease of development. And clearly, there are so many delays possible, and even potentially creating obstacles to finishing a development at Vernal Pike. I'm glad we had the meeting with the neighbors, the residents who live in that area, just as we did for North Park. We had 2 of those meetings, plus we had the one at Detmer Park, just like at Thompson. Those meetings are the ones that have been really helpful for us to understand concerns, and grateful that DLZ was present at all of those meetings, and they have found there are ways to work around many of the concerns that are there as well. So that's really good news. But I will say that we could fall into paralysis by analysis. Oh, but wait, why don't we look at this? Why don't we get more data here? Why don't we study that? We are never going to find a perfect site. True. Have we found the best site? I think so. And we could study this for another 10 years, and that is not going to help anyone inside that facility, whether they are staying there or working there. And it will certainly not help people in our community, and it will certainly not help us reduce recidivism. So let's think about what really matters here and move forward. And I'm so glad to hear everybody seems to be on board. I will say that the only location that offers any option for transit and creating a park and ride facility and actually moving forward is North Park. So we have to plan for the future. We are thinking about now, but we have to think about 20 years from now. We have to think about 40 years from now, 50 years from now. And we have to be able to expand if we need to, and hopefully we don't. Hopefully that is just something that will not be needed, but I'm not going to dictate to the unfortunate soul who sits in this seat in 20 years. So anyway, pox upon your house, I should say. But, because if you go cheap and you go, oh, we got to be downtown and we got to make it all fit, you end up with what we have now. And that is not the answer. So I appreciate everyone for being here and your input and talking this through. Really, really, really grateful for everyone. So thank you all. And if there's nothing else, we'll be adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.